First, President Trump stepped up to the microphone in the Rose Garden this afternoon with the Attorney General at his side to finally admit that there was absolutely nothing they could do to change the effect of the recent Supreme Court decision forbidding a question about a person's citizenship on the next census. The president then pretended that he was taking action, despite the Supreme Court decision, by ordering every department and agency of the federal government to provide the Department of Commerce, which is in charge of the census, with all the data that those departments might have on citizenship statistics in this country, if any. That is data that is already available to the Census Bureau, but it is still up to the Census Bureau and the professionals working there to decide exactly how to obtain the most accurate count available of persons living in the United States, which is what the Constitution requires the census to count, not citizens, persons. The Attorney General of the United States proudly stood beside the president in the Rose Garden as the president told this lie about Democrats.
Far-left Democrats in our country are determined to conceal the number of illegal aliens in our midst. They probably know the number is far greater, much higher than anyone would have ever believed before. Maybe that's why they fight so hard. This is part of a broader left-wing effort to erode the rights of the American citizen, and is very unfair to our country.
And then the Attorney General of the United States stepped up to the microphone to congratulate the president on his lying and to add to that lying.
Thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations on today's executive order, which will ensure that we finally have an accurate understanding of how many citizens and non-citizens live in our country.
That is absolutely not true. There is nothing that the president ordered today that will make the next census more accurate. The Attorney General knows that. The Attorney General allowed himself to be a prop at a political re-election rally for the president on government property today. Leading off our discussion tonight are Neal Katyal, a former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and a professor of politics and media at Morgan State University. Both are MSNBC contributors. Neal Katyal, you've argued this case. You're part of the team that won this case in the Supreme Court. What did you see happening in the Rose Garden today?
Well, what I saw happening in the Rose Garden, Lawrence, was really a time for celebration for the American people, because we have to celebrate a Supreme Court that reined in this president, calling his actions contrived and unlawful in an opinion by Chief Justice John Roberts. We have to celebrate a rule of law. We have to celebrate a Justice Department that stood up to the president and said, we can't be asking these questions. So that's the positive thing I saw in the Rose Garden. The negative thing I saw is what not to celebrate. The president, Donald Trump, who, after all, ordered this question put on the census in the first place because of the Voting Rights Act. He said he wanted to enforce it, which you didn't hear a word about in the ceremony today. Instead, you heard all this rhetoric about counting illegal aliens and stuff like that, which his citizenship stuff has never done in the first place. It just asks whether you're a citizen or not, doesn't even ask whether you're legal or illegal. And more generally, yeah, sure, he finally obeyed the Supreme Court after threatening to defy it for 2 weeks. That's a pretty low bar. I mean, this is a president who for the last 2 weeks has been saying, I'm going to issue an executive order to do an end run around the Supreme Court. And I can't think of something more disqualifying for a president of the United States than to defy openly what a Supreme Court does or to flirt with it. That's just not what we look for in a leader.
Jason Johnson, the president has a unique form of surrender. He declares victory in every surrender, and this seemed to me to be the staged attempt to claim a victory while surrendering to the Supreme Court.
Yes, the president claimed that he had victory last fall in the midterms. The president claimed that he was exonerated by the Mueller report. I would love to see this man play poker. He would probably leave the table naked and say, I won, I won. They took all my clothes, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what the facts are. Donald Trump is going to claim that he is somehow victorious, that he has somehow been exonerated, that he is somehow still able to do what he wants to do. What's most disturbing to me, in all honesty, about what we saw at the Rose Garden is, again, it's the idea of the Attorney General William Barr playing up to the president's lies. There needs to be somebody occasionally in the White House who says to this president, you're wrong, this doesn't work, let's move on. I mean, you saw that the entire team in the Justice Department basically said, we can't do this for you, and they tried to replace them. So I'm concerned, and also, Lawrence, this is just the opening salvo. We still have a president who is sending ICE agents basically to terrorize people throughout the country this weekend for no purpose other than to politically annoy people, to frustrate people, and to intimidate people. So this census question being gone is just the beginning. He's going to be attacking anybody he thinks he can with whatever resources he has available for the next 2 years.
Neal Katyal, to the William Barr piece of this, this is a week in which the Attorney General suggested that there was a way to move forward simply by changing the Justice Department lawyers who would be arguing this case. And they actually went into court and tried to do that. They ran into serious trouble in one court trying to change those lawyers. But that was the Attorney General trying as much as he possibly could to play along with the president on this.
Yeah, I've been disheartened by this Attorney General when it comes to this case, both because of that and trying to basically swap in new lawyers who'll do Trump's dirty work. But also just even today, this whole idea, this charade that this executive order actually does anything. All the executive order does, according to its description by the president, is order the Census Bureau to use its existing databases to collect information. That's what the Census Bureau has been arguing all along. That's what the challengers to this whole citizenship question have been arguing all along, and what the Justice Department have been going into court to say, oh, that wouldn't be enough. We actually have to formally add this question to the census and the like. So all this executive order did was do what we are already doing, what the Census Bureau wanted to do. And I guess you can have a celebratory Rose Garden ceremony when you issue an executive order that says the sky is blue, but at the end of the day, you haven't done anything. You've just announced what everyone already knows.
And Jason, do you see coincidental timing here in the announcement of raids for this weekend at the same time when the president is making as much noise as he possibly can about the census? You have people who are afraid of opening the door, being told not to open the door to anyone who knocks on their doors. And at some point next year, in addition to mailing census forms out to people, there will be people who go around the country and knock on doors to try to follow up on people who haven't mailed in their census. I've had my door knocked on by a young UCLA student who's hired for that purpose. And so this, it strikes me as all part of a chorus to try to make sure those doors stay closed tightly next year when census takers come around.
Oh, yes, Lawrence, the idea is to keep brown and tan people from filling out the census. That's what the president wants to do. There's been plenty of sociological research. You have former Republican consultants who have said that that is the goal and the purpose of these sorts of things, to make people nervous, because when people are undercounted or aren't counting themselves, it makes it more easy for the federal government to not give resources to those particular communities for everything from disaster relief to education. But, Lawrence, this is the thing that really frightens me about what's happening this weekend. Even beyond what might be the racial motivations, even beyond the fact that even ICE and Border Patrol agents have been saying, we don't think this is the most effective way to go, what leads anyone in this country to believe that the President of the United States will not use this method the weekend before a presidential election? If he is allowed to do this whenever he wants, basically just send sort of American troops throughout this country to major metropolitan cities to go after something that is not immediately an immediate danger to this country, what makes you think he won't do this next election year? He will. It's another exercise of power on the part of Donald Trump that demonstrates that he wants to be a proto-dictator. He is not concerned about democracy or making this country better. He is concerned about frightening non-white people in this country from participating in our democracy.
Neal Katyal, what happens next on the census cases that are still before the courts?
Well, it's going to be up to the judges there to dismiss them or not. You know, there are all these allegations that the president added this to the census for the purpose of discriminating, for reasons Jason was saying a moment ago. So there are some questions about looking back in time. But looking forward in time, at least if the president's word can be taken today, and, you know, I know that's a big if, but assuming that he follows through on what he said, they're going to inform the courts there will be no citizenship question on the 2020 census, which is exactly what we and all the challengers had been asking for. So it is a stunning absolute victory for the challengers, an absolute defeat for Trump, and hopefully these court cases will now be entirely over and this whole lawless defiance of the Supreme Court will be put to bed.
Neal Katyal and Jason Johnson, thank you for leading off our discussion tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lauren.